On Dragon Ball's 20th anniversary, the first ever home release hit the market. It had broken colors and out of sync audio. Whatever. On Dragon Ball's 25th anniversary, Funimation released its first ever HD scan, which was extremely awesome. Until it was cancelled. And if you thought that was bad, just wait until Dragon Ball's 30th anniversary joins the chat, because it had one of the absolute worst home releases in Dragon Ball history. We just can't stop winning. And because of that winning, once Dragon Ball's 40th anniversary rolled around the corner, fans across the world received news of Dragon Ball Super Remaster, which, it's fine. But the main event was Moro and Xenoverse 3, and those won't be around until 2027. So is this year really going to go by without anything else? Well, thanks to the crazy fans in the restoration group Kineko Video, this year, the Year of Our Kami 2026 will offer us a glimpse of what Dragon Ball would look like if Toei actually gave a shit. Restored for the very first time and released in honor of the anime's 40th anniversary, this is Kineko Video's HD rescan of Dragon Ball. Okay, so as a quick primer, the original Dragon Ball anime has never been released in native HD. There was a terrible AI upscale from Select Division in Spain, then AB Group did a good AI upscale in France, before Toei stood in their way because they wanted to release their own thing. And rather than spend any money scanning the original film reels in HD like any other good company would, they decided to do their own upscale, which is insultingly dog shit. It looks about as good as those fan remaster attempts in the 2000s. But this is where Kineko Video comes in, which is both extremely exciting but also kind of a tease. Okay, let me explain. You see, over the past 6 years, the group has found 16mm prints of the original Dragon Ball series and spent a remarkable amount of time and money scanning and restoring them into the glorious form you see before you. The unfortunate part is, they've managed to only find 13 episodes. Now that's actually an insane number given prints are typically locked down in license holders' basements around the globe, but it does mean this is but a mere tease of what a complete HD remaster of the show could look like. But the reason I wanted to cover this today in spite of that is that I think the story behind this work is worth telling. You see, if we jump all the way back to 2020, Kineko Video was already operating as a fan restoration group, which means they'd hunt down rare old film reels, restore them, and release them into the wild. And after acquiring a Dr. Slump traffic safety short, one of their members decided to start trying to hunt down Dragon Ball material. Now, of course, it's not nearly as simple as plugging Dragon Ball 16mm film reel into Google, because those things are like gold dust these days. So he went a step further and looked into delisted eBay posts going back years. And it was here he found someone who had once tried to sell 5 episodes. Now, as they were marked as sold, Kineko reached out to the original seller to see if he still had them at all. And lo and behold, he actually did! Thankfully, he agreed to lend his reels to Kineko, and that's how this all began. They scanned them in, sent the reels back, and continued their hunt. Then, in what was an incredible twist of fate, the same guy reached out to them a few months later after realizing he actually had 2 more film reels. This brought Kineko up to 7 episodes in total. The first 5 from episodes 133 to 139, and these 2 new ones comprising episodes 56 and 57. The collection was growing and they weren't about to stop there. You see, a Japanese fan contacted the group, and this is where it gets quite eerie. Not only did he have a Dragon Ball traffic safety reel to send in, but he also had Dragon Ball episode 58, the very episode that followed the 2 most recent acquisitions. And along with it, he had the entirety of movie 12. Now at this point, things were looking good, but they were about to get even better. The jackpot was right around the corner when, out of nowhere, the reel for the entirety of Dragon Ball's second movie popped up on Yahoo Auctions. That bad boy was expensive. So the team banded together and crowdfunded the full amount, totaling around $1,400 US. Now, while all this backroom Dragon Ball dealing was going on, Kineko was starting to gain notoriety for their releases. They had gained access to a print of a rare Super Mario movie from the 80s that only ever had a VHS release in the past. When they dropped their remarkable 4K restoration, that thing went viral. It was covered by all the major gaming outlets at the time and really pushed their presence in the restoration space to new heights. So, when someone popped up on Reddit with a film reel for Dragon Ball Z's 9th movie, the comments immediately pointed them in the direction of Kineko Video. Because it turns out that back in the day when Funimation were creating their own HD releases of these films, they left the reels with the scanning company. And over a decade later, when they were looking to clear out their storage, they were snatched from the jaws of the trash heap and gifted to this very lucky fan. So against all odds and conventional wisdom, he listened to Reddit and made contact with Kineko. And it's a good thing he did, because not only did he have a piece of movie 9, he also had a piece of movie 7. And while not complete, this allowed the group to create true 4K versions of these movies for the very first time in history. But of course, this video is all about the original Dragon Ball TV series, and that tale comes to a close with the surprise handover of another 5 episodes from a collector. You see, it turns out that in the early 2000s, these Funimation reels were traded around at various conventions for a remarkably cheap rate. This person in question had actually picked up a few and just sat on them for years, as film scanning is typically pretty expensive. So it just made sense to loan them to Kineko for scanning. With all of that said and done, the group now had 13 Dragon Ball episodes, 2 full movies and 2 partial ones, which wasn't bad at all considering all of these acquisitions took place over the span of just 2 and a bit years. But of course, it's now early 2026. So what exactly did the group do over these past few years? Well, they turned this into this. These film reels are all many decades old and were stored in all kinds of different places, which means every batch was degraded in its own unique way. Episodes 56, 57, and the final wedding episodes were largely undamaged, but all had a yellow color cast to them with dim greens and slight colored fringing on the edges of lines. On the flip side, episodes 133 to 139 were extremely red. It was only really the Japanese fans reel that was largely okay color-wise, only showing a slightly teal skew. This is likely because this was a direct Japanese print that was given to TV networks back in the day for them to create broadcast tapes from, while the previous episodes were all duplicates shipped overseas many years after the Japanese broadcast was finished. This, therefore, goes a long way in explaining why the Western prints were extremely dark too. You see, when you create these copies, it's not like a digital scenario where it's a perfect one-to-one duplicate. Instead, you're essentially photographing the film onto another bit of film, which involves several factors that ultimately end up changing the overall look. And in many cases, these duplicates were duplicates of duplicates, so those issues added up fast. Thankfully, nothing was particularly difficult to color correct from these episodes. Some white balancing cures the cast, and from there, it's the kind of typical color work you'd expect from a color correction project, adjusting hues, saturation, and color brightness until they look as intended. But perhaps the most interesting aspect is how the darkness of the overall image was not just fixed, but dramatically improved even against currently existing scans. Now, I'm sure many of you might have sat down and watched Dragon Ball Kai and gone, wait, hold on. Why is Vegeta's hair brown? And the answer is simply because that's how it was painted. In almost all of the official releases, the dark detail is crushed down to the point that you can't actually tell the difference between brown and black. But when you have access to the film reels themselves, you can access all of that dark and bright color detail because film stores significantly more exposure information than video does. That's why Kai and this Kineko release share a similar look. They're both displaying the animation cells with their original color and dynamic range. But it's not as simple as it sounds. The quality of your scanner and the way you use it is actually almost as important as the restoration itself. Going back to Kai once again, I imagine you may have also questioned why on earth it looks so blurry considering this was a whole new modern HD scan. Well, the unfortunate reality is that, perhaps due to deadline crunch, the show was scanned significantly faster than it should have been, which means every single frame is blurred vertically from the sheer speed at which it went through the scanner. Both Kai and Kineko are using the same 16mm size film source, but the difference in clarity is astonishing because Kineko actually did things properly. What a novel idea. Now, the scan process wasn't as smooth sailing as it might sound here. Originally, the group was reliant on a company in Texas to do the work, but their scanner had artificial sharpening enabled, and it was generally poor at picking up clarity in the red parts of the image. This meant that it was almost impossible to fix the faded lines on those red tinted film reels. They actually went the route that many professional restoration places do that purists often think is a blanket bad thing. They did careful noise removal to reduce the problematic grain and then resynthesize the grain back in afterwards. And yet, even with a solution like that, they then did maybe the craziest thing in this entire tale. They dropped the external scan house and instead bought a scanner that cost as much as a mid-range Porsche. Yes, you heard me right. With this insanely good scanner in competent hands now, episodes 58 onwards all look incredible. The lines are a deep black and the grain is significantly more pleasing to the eye now. Dragon Ball Movie 2 was scanned with this, as were Z-Movie 7 and 9. This group has really gone the whole extra mile in ensuring their releases look fantastic. In fact, when it was discovered that their Movie 12 reel was water damaged, they sent it off to a film lab in Tokyo to get it fixed, and when they got it back, you wouldn't have ever known it was damaged in the first place. Time and time again, they just keep going further beyond what any other restoration group has ever done. There are really only a few compromises I can even think of. The first is that only a few episodes have had their splice marks cleaned up. That's that mark at the top of the frame every single time a new cut happens. They were originally planning to fix this on every episode, but it's a time-consuming process they deemed not worthwhile when they could instead devote their time to complete features such as the movies. For example, their copy of Movie 12 doesn't have quite the level of dynamic range you'd expect from a film reel, so it takes a great deal of time to ensure the skin and eyes aren't clipping into one big white mess. It definitely makes sense to dedicate time to something complete like this. But I'm sure for many of you, you're wondering why film scans of these movies even matter, let alone as a priority focus. After all, the Dragon Ball movies already have good HD remasters, especially if you're watching Seed of Might's color-corrected versions. At first glance, these scans might seem redundant, but actually they offer something we've never truly had before. A complete 4:3 presentation in not just HD, but 4K. While it's true that the films were composed with 16:9 in mind, they were also storyboarded and animated for 4:3 simultaneously. And given that the staff spent years working almost exclusively in that format for the TV series, it's clear that many shots simply work better when uncropped. The compositions feel more natural and less constrained. There's more headroom, more space for movement, and less of that cramped feeling that comes from cropping the image down. For the very first time, you can actually choose how to experience them without making any compromises you're not comfortable with. And that's really the broader point here and why I chose to cover this topic at all. Dragon Ball home releases are consistently a compromise. Cropped, badly upscaled, poorly filtered, or simply left on archaic forms of media that haven't stood the test of time. So, not to sound like the Joker here, but a video like this is about sending a message. 13 episodes isn't much in the grand scheme of Dragon Ball's total runtime, but it shows people what Dragon Ball could look like if Toei actually cared. And most importantly, it lets people know that it is both okay to expect better and that better exists at all. Toei are perfectly capable of doing proper remasters. They've done it for other series like Dragon Quest without issue. But for Dragon Ball's 40th anniversary, one of the most important milestones in the franchise's history, they chose to honor its legacy by releasing an upscale of a 20-year-old DVD instead. They seem to believe that's an acceptable way to preserve one of the most influential anime ever created. But it isn't. And it's a shame we can't rely on international license holders like Crunchyroll to pick up the slack either, because they've shown time and again they also don't want to spend the money. So, I'm going to ask two things of you. Firstly, if you happen to have any film reels for Dragon Ball, please reach out to Kineko Video and loan them your reel for scanning. As you've seen, they'll do an incredible job and the fandom will be eternally grateful for your contribution. Secondly, and this is the most important one, I want to ask that you do not settle for less. Let Toei know bad upscales are not acceptable. They have the film reels. They've worked with good restoration houses before. An HD rescan is not an impossible task. It's just expensive. And Dragon Ball is exactly the kind of series worth spending that money on. If not Dragon Ball, what other series would you do it for? If they actually put out a real remaster worldwide, we will buy it. All we ask is that they put the same level of care and respect into it that the very people who made the show did, all those decades ago. Thanks to Kineko Video, we've now seen a glimpse of what that future may look like if Toei steps up, or maybe more accurately, it's a glimpse of the past as it was always meant to be seen. Here's hoping the story doesn't end here, but for now, I will say thank you once again to Kineko Video. Thank you for watching. I've been Totally Not Mark, and I'll see you next time.